to a new edition of Right Align with Dan and Clayton from Found Studio. It's not the other way around, is it, guys? It's not Studio Found, is it? It's Found Studio.
To be honest, it's just Found. Found Studio Limited is the company, just to sort of, there's a lot of founds.
Okay. Brilliant. Well, before we get going, we've started to drop all of our old recordings onto YouTube if anybody wants to sort of look back at some of the people that we spoke to. So just search for Right Align events on YouTube and you can find those there. Dan, as we're getting warmed up, is it possible for you to take us back as far as you can remember in terms of when design played a role in your life, leading us through education, first roles in the industry, and just sort of give us a bit of a background on your career today?
Yeah, so morning, Ryan. Well, so I didn't study design. I was a weird one at school because I was quite academic, but very arty as well. So I did fine art, and I went up to Derby and did my foundation there because it was the first year you could do what they call a year zero. So you didn't have to do your foundation like in sort of the local college. You could go up to uni. So I was there and I did fine art, and it was all the cliches, we didn't really, it was weird. We were in college the most, but did the least. And we were just sort of, I don't know what we were doing, but it was a good laugh. But I'd been in bands before I went to college, realized that this kind of the metal bands I was into weren't that cool, and sort of gradually moved over to sort of DJing and stuff. And then that's what got me into design, doing club flyers, designing record sleeves. And then when I finished at Derby, I was working in a record shop. Then got work experience at a place in Nottingham, and that's where I kind of learnt my craft as a graphic designer for 3 years under Rob, who I'd set up Studio Output with. So that was kind of my route into things. So Studio Output set up in 2002, still going, and then around 2007, 2008, we opened a London office, and that's when we started working with Found. They were a small collective then. And yeah, they just started to work with them for a few years, and a lot of projects for PlayStation. Actually for lots of different Sony businesses, kind of some related, some not. And then around, the dates go, as you say, Chris, I'm getting old. The memories fade, but yeah, I think around sort of 2012, we formally acquired Found, and it was a kind of, we had lots of different businesses back then, which was the way we decided to do it back then. We had Glug, we had Studio Output, we had an experiential agency called LA, we had a business in China. And to be honest, I look back and I'm like, crikey, what effort that was. But I think what's happened over the years is we've kind of simplified things down to the point now where I run Found full time. And Found's it's a different beast from all those years ago. And really it's only in the last sort of three and a half years that we've stopped doing so much different stuff and really doubling down on the CG work. And that's the Found that you see today. And and I think that's where it's sort of come to for me. And from a design point of view, so I wasn't formally trained designer. When I was designing, it was brand design, which I love doing, but the output at the time went into all sorts of different directions. And yeah, so I think the last thing I designed was the Glug logo. It's probably 8 or 9 years ago. But I think what I love about what we do now is, I love the business side of things. So I've hung up the mouse and, love a spreadsheet, and I'm not afraid to say it.
So is Output your first foray into design, and you didn't work in any other agencies before that?
No, so I worked at a place called 1210 from, what would that have been, 99 to 2002. And yeah, that was, so that 1210 did, basically all our clients were kind of East Midlands record labels, bars, restaurants, clubs, shops. So as a sort of lad in the early 20s living right in the centre of Nottingham, it was great because you could just wander around anywhere. And, and I think what was great about that as well is that you would see your clients all the time. They would come in and sit next to you and design. So it was, you were at the coalface, but you got that kind of instant gratification or not gratification. You'd be going down to printers on Friday, picking everything up. There was a sort of rawness to it that but it made you understand the other side of things, which was really important.
Yeah, and that began in Nottingham, didn't it?
Began in Nottingham, yeah. So we set up Studio Output in Nottingham in 2002. And yeah, I don't think we opened London until 2007. And that was after working for Ministry of Sound for a couple of years. We won a big contract for them in 2005. So we kind of ran that remotely, but that gave us a sort of, I suppose, a route into London. But, more and more of our work was down there anyway. We used to do a lot of work for the BBC. So that was, we were often down there. Some familiar names. Hi, Michael. So yeah, that's kind of.
There seems to be an underpinning of music to a lot of this stuff. Is that so like you were saying earlier, really, because you didn't go through designers from a training level, so to speak. It was much more of it was built upon your personal cultural references at the time. So whether music and Nottingham being, we've got I was speaking to Gemma and Joanna a couple of weeks ago, and that idea of Nottingham was quite a hotbed for that sort of stuff. I remember a lot of sort of venues, bands. It was sort of pretty much the capital of that area, isn't it? Maybe Leicester might.
Yeah, absolutely, Chris. Yeah, I mean, it's back when I first started in Derby, Renaissance was there, which was like the first super club. Back in the sort of house days, I got into this by running drum and bass nights and sort of breakbeat nights, and then Nottingham was all of us who worked together were either promoters or DJs or both. Not particularly good or successful, but there was that passion, and I think it's interesting because it's only in the last few years I've realised that it's still a massive interest of mine. But when we set up business, I sold my decks, and it was quite a sort of symbolic kind of right. I need to grow up a bit, sort of working every Thursday night till late. But it's one of the first things we spoke about, Clayton, wasn't it? Was kind of music, and albeit a different kind of connection and interest in your side, but it's always been in the background for you as well, hasn't it?
Oh, totally. I think that, it marks moments in time as much as it inspires or gives you an output for that design work as well. Like the idea of designing flyers, I love that. I have them stuck up in my room at uni, on the wall. Might have even had one of your designs, Dan, but I didn't go clubbing in Nottingham that often, to be honest.
I think the thing is with it though, it's very much it's a creative outlet, isn't it? Just because it's not what we do now, design or motion or whatever it is.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the same as like fashion or photography or film. We reference all of these different things, don't we? That's
or like to at least try and find the outlet that gives you that kind of freedom. Like the club promoter that needs a flyer, but actually doesn't really mind too much what it ends up looking like. Do you know what I mean? It's like actually that freedom to just flex your newfound skills or the skills that you're developing.
Yeah, and
you might look back on it and cringe a bit, but
but also taking those opportunities. If someone's a promoter and they need a flyer, and you can work a Mac, for instance. It's as simple as that, isn't it? It allows you to feed both passions, doesn't it? So, Clayton, how about you? Can you take us back to your just run us through like Dan's just done from first inspirations and where that came about to your first roles in the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. I was so I'm from Stafford originally, and grew up there, and I had creative parents, but not by trade. My dad was a maintenance engineer, and my mum was a manager of the operating theatre at Stafford Hospital. So the very not on paper were they creative, but at home we would, that's my lasting memory is of my parents kind of always sort of drawing and, encouraging us to do the same. And so it was, I had like a creative upbringing, I suppose you could say, that are surrounded by that kind of stuff at home. And then, did my art foundation course like Dan, and had a very similar experience as well in that kind of finding your feet. But, talk about freedom of a club flyer, but there it was just really what do you want to be? And I remember one of the tutors throwing a block on the floor, and for us that was split into fine art, fashion textiles, 3D or graphics. Those are the four sort of pathways, and he had a piece of wood that had that written, like one of those written on each side, and he just lob it on the table and then point at someone and go, right, what's that? what's 3D? And so you'd kind of be really put on the spot to sort of start to try and understand what those different categories were and where you might go. And I mean, I went for the graphic side of things and touched upon some typography unwittingly, just got interested in that, reading the design press at the time and Creative Review and iMagazines that were doing the rounds in the library. And typography is something I just started kind of playing around with, handwriting and that. And I got latched onto by one of my tutors at Foundation that, at that point in time when you're applying for uni, and not wondering where you're going to go and what city you might end up in and all that good stuff. It was London College of Printing was put in front of me as you should go and speak to this lot down in London. And, at that point in time, I was like, bloody hell, I can't actually even, I've never been to London. And the thought of going down and living there was quite daunting, So anyway, it just so happened that a couple of my other mates that were on the same foundation course were going down to look at Middlesex, going down to look at Kingston. And so we did a bit of a lads on tour, just go down and get the train together. And it was really good just to go and see each of the universities we're all individually interested in. And lo and behold, I applied for London College of Printing and got in. So that was it from that point on. It was in on the graphic design typography pathway. And almost after 6 months, halfway through the first year, the moving image was offered as a kind of split. So you could do typography, but you could do moving image on the typography pathway. So I jumped on that, started to learn After Effects, started to kind of pick up the idea of sequential thinking, filmmaking. DV cameras that were doing around at that point in time, were something that, if you were lucky enough to get hold of one, then you could start shooting video and think about editing and all of those sort of fundamental skills. So I did a bit of that and loved it. And, I think that moment in time where the course split from pure graphic design typography, that would split into experimental, editorial, and then this moving image one. I'm so glad that I went that way. And there was just obviously something in me that wanted to do that. And that's still, I've done a number of talks recently, and it comes up time and time again. It's at that point in time where that was offered, and you kind of take the plunge. I think it's like typography and moving image is something that we talk about on a daily basis, Dan, really, don't we? Graphic design and being design led, as well as working in sequence, is something that's really interesting to me. So
I think it's funny what you come back to, isn't it? And it's interesting, you're probing me earlier, Chris, around the music stuff. I think it's lockdown forces us to think a lot about sort of I suppose what's really in there, right, Clayton, and why are we doing this, and what's the kind of that scratch that you always want to itch. And I think it's interesting because it kind of, we talk about it a lot, Clayton, don't we? Not in a sort of highfalutin way, but you need that kind of principle, that fundamental of why you're doing it. So that it doesn't matter what the software is or the colors or the trends. It's like, what is that kind of elemental thing that's driving it?
Definitely. And I think that, if we were all invited to do talks and have the luxury of looking back and planning and thinking about what that journey is, the more you do it, I think the more you it starts to click and you realize one thing leads to another, and, plenty of serendipity and luck and, privilege at the same time, I think. But, these things are connected, and, everyone would be able to go back and just look at why we're all sitting in this room right now. Some journeys are shorter. I imagine there's some younger people on here than us, but they'll push on, and these things never really leave you. So I left LCP and then went straight into doing MA at the Royal College of Art. So another sort of heart in the throat moment of like, we're going to get in, we're going to be able to step up to the mark for that kind of a place. And so I had a great couple of years there and started to look back actually and get into the letterpress studio there and work with Alan Kitchen and, really sort of, like you say, Dan, scratching an itch. I mean, I think that typography thing that had been seeded at Foundation was like here I was in a room, completely surrounded by it. LCP, interestingly, at that point in time, were dismantling their letterpress and typesetting departments. And I managed to grab a box full of like dies and monotype stamping machines and things from the skip. Believe it or not.
Clayton and Chris, you'll like this. So Rob, who I set up Output with, who still works in Output, he's a little bit older than me. He's 48, 49. He learned like letterpress setting at LCP when he went there. He's that old school. When he was there, they bought their first Mac, and I don't think he touched it for a year. But yeah, he was learning kind of old school typesetting. It's amazing how quickly it changed, isn't it?
Absolutely. Well, for them to be kicking, I mean, it's back up and running again now, but they lost a lot of kit, and I've got some of it in my shed. So that that Royal College basically allowed me to get back into that. And I think it's worth saying, you know, LCP and Royal College, the tutors you meet, but also the people that are surrounding you, I've found what advice would you give to anybody like graduating or any students that are kind of starting out, is stay in touch with those people that you're surrounded by. Like that I honestly believe is your network. Your network starts at that point. And the amount of times that I've crossed paths again with people that I was studying with, or, you know, you get to a certain point in life where those people you were with at college are now in the position to commission work, or to, you know, to ask for your expertise, or, you know, vice versa. So I think it's just interesting to keep tabs on those and I did, you know, I kind of keep in touch with people as much as possible. But so Royal College then led to me doing a little bit of teaching. Actually, I went back to LCP and was invited back to go and do that, you know, associate lecturing day a week sort of thing for a term, and really enjoyed that. Gave me a load of confidence actually to be able to feel comfortable in a situation like this, or to step up on stage, you know. Nothing like a room full of 17, 18-year-old first years, you know, 75 of them, you know, in one department, and, you know, just peering back at you and saying, you know, what is it we're doing, to make you think on the spot. So yeah, that was another really good experience for me. And then into the world of working, I went into Soho and joined a post-production company on Wardour Street, and that saw me in the basement, really, just learning all of the video formats of like digibeta tapes and things that just, you know, the equivalent of WeTransfer now was, you know, videotapes and video recording machines, digibeta machines that you know, would get biked around by somebody on a bike, you know, not there was no transferring over the internet at that point in time. So yeah, it's frightening to think, but
like dinosaurs, aren't we?
We are, aren't we? But all the formats, so, you know, digibetas and DVDs, I would design menus for DVDs, and, you know, they're the sorts of things that you're trying to get rid of now. But that really put me in a professional position to, you know, start to flex that animation side of things, and, you know, needed to understand video editing and keyframing and all of that kind of good stuff, a looping video, you know, things that we just take for granted now that, you know, you needed to really plan for. Then after that, talking about people you meet, there was a good friend of mine from college who said, "Oh, I'm at Why Not Associates right now. They're motion guys moving on. You should come and have a word." So I did that, and again, another moment in time, you just think, my God, you know, that Why Not Associates? That's I've got the books, I've got this, that, and the other. Now I know their work, and collected the CD-ROMs from Creative Review and all that. So I was quite nervous going in there to speak to them. It was kind of like, felt like celebrity designers, and lo and behold, that was me for the next 10 years. I got that job, and was the motion capacity there. And again, like, you know, you can't think of a studio that celebrates and messes about with type as much as Why Not did. That, you know, that coupled with motion was my my sort of pairing once again. So and then that got me into, you know, understanding 3D. I'm trying to gallop along a little bit here, Chris, but 10 years goes by really quickly, you know, when you're put up for projects that you might not have thought you could do, directing videos, you know, stepping on set, planning for live action shoots, animating, you know, mobile phones and all the sort of CG aspects of stuff that came to the studio. So yeah, really kind of, they were really small, Why Not? And like 8 people. But they were getting global campaigns for, you know, the likes of BlackBerry at the time. And, you know, we were shooting videos for Grace Jones, and, you know, you're working with the Tate and the V&A and the Royal Academy. And it was just, the scale of the projects didn't really match up with the scale of the studio, but it meant that we all had to muck in. And so that ended up, you know, doing all that stuff. And I don't think in a bigger agency or in a bigger studio, I would necessarily have had that opportunity. So I'm grateful for that. And then after that, you know, comes to a point when you do 10 years at a place, so interested in what's going on in the world. And so I then looked to try and step up a bit, and you know, with my video skills, and with, you know, stepping into an art director's role at that point in time. So I joined Territory Studio, you know, famed for their movie work and VFX, and you know, went in on a kind of brand side of things there, and experiential. So again, like, suddenly I'm surrounded by those that are kind of the best in the world at kind of coming up with visual effects and different pipelines of how that works. You know, Why Not? You kind of, there'd be a server and you'd make it work, you know, with sometimes software that was waiting for the license to be purchased, you know. And and just, you know, get by. Whereas this suddenly meant like, no, we're doing this properly, and this needs to go to Hollywood, and this, you know, has to be this particular file type. So kind of straightened my posture a little bit on all of that. And it was a fantastic couple of years, tough going, but you know, very good exposure to a different sort of caliber, I suppose you could say. Yeah. And then obviously my move after that was a couple of years at Territory, and found myself in a multiple role position where I was art director on paper, but I was hiring, I was commissioning work, commissioning audio, helping to run the studio as much as I was doing my day job. So I wanted to try and make that official as a creative director, and seeing the advert from Found when that came out and what Dan had written really resonated with me. So there you go. That rounds that off. That's where I am right now.
That's what I just funny. Just ending on that, Clayton, is I found that myself where you're in a position, you go into a role as in a certain sort of level or under a certain status, whether it's, say senior, for instance. But during that time, you end up doing so many different things that you come out of it, you're like, what am I now? Where do I fit back into that world? Is that something you really struggled with, or did you just happen to find what Dan had written in the right place at the right time?
I would say that, workload is something that we all struggle with, I think. And if you do, you put down art director and then break that down as to what you're actually doing every day, quantity of projects. But I did struggle with it for sure. I think that, and not that the next move that I wanted was a get out and a kind of let's lay back and take it easy from this point on. But I think it's something that you realize that, like, are you a jack of all trades, or are you going to actually carve out what the role is that you want it to be? And I think that I think it was daunting whilst I was in it, because I was asked of a lot, to do a lot of different aspects, but it's kind of, it didn't quite kill me, but it definitely made me sit up and think, what do you want this to be? And then it was actually just a perfect moment in time. Sometimes you see something, be it a job ad or a piece of work that someone else has created, and it can make something click, and you just go, actually, I must have had something bubbling away in the back of my head there that I was, thinking about moving, or this isn't right, for me to kind of go headstrong into answering or responding to that advert, or wanting to make something in my own right,
Yeah. Dan, going back over to when you were Output, you'd moved to London. That was because of the Ministry of Sound, the amount of work you were doing with the Ministry of Sound. What was that like when you came to the end of that period with those guys and then acquired Found? What did that look like, jumping from one to the other, or is it much smoother than that?
Well, the thing is, it's over such a long time frame. I moved over full time to Found 15 months ago, but it had been in the planning for a long time. And then so that was due to happen 1st of September last year. So sort of, once we got out of the kind of dark days of sort of lockdown and we knew a bit more about COVID. But before then, we'd already got out of the big office that we shared with some of our other businesses. So one of the partners had set up like a games business in the meantime, and then he'd moved out to different premises. Glug had gone. So it was all kind of, for me, it was I suppose it was like a personal sort of decluttering and moving on anyway, because but what happened in the middle of all that was that Mike, who was one of the original founders of Found, had decided he was leaving. So he was a creative director. He'd been with us sort of 7 years post sale. He went off to Man vs Machine, which was a big sort of surprise and a big shock. But at the same time was, okay, well, that gives us the opportunity to kind of go again. And I think it forced me to do a lot of, I suppose, soul searching about, okay, well, what do I want in this sort of right-hand person in this, in this business that I'm going to be looking after full time now. So it was like a real joy to write that job ad, and we had a really interesting conversation about it, Clayton, didn't we? Because it just, for me, it was very much from the heart, and I was like, this is completely, it's not an ad to kind of go, right, I'm selling a turkey here. It was kind of like, no, this is potential. Thanks for letting him in, Chris.
Cheers, mate.
Yeah, so it was a long, slow process, and then, you know, since Clayton's been here, which is 13 months now, right, Clayton?
Yeah.
So we did our mid-year away day a couple of weeks ago, Chris, and as part of that, it's normally me kind of death by PowerPoint with people, but you know, I said with Clayton, look, there's a year's journey here, and it was really interesting just hearing it played back through your lens, Clayton, wasn't it, in terms of the talks, the events, the projects, and just the kind of, you know, I'm somebody who's very sort of very process orientated, very sort of strategically led and plans a lot, but also is kind of like, well, the plan is more like a compass than a map, because you don't know what you're going to find along the way. You don't know, you know, where that path's going to lead you down into that valley and what's going to happen down there and how you might come up or where you might come up. And that's been one of the really interesting things, is to kind of go, well, let's press go and see where we end up, right?
Well, the last line of the ad that you wrote was, you know, here's to the next chapter. And I think that, you know, that really made me sort of think, right, there's a refresh here. There is a point in time and a junction where the studio's sort of looking back at itself. And so I think that, you know, that idea of like not quite knowing what it's going to be, we're going to mold it, and actually there's opportunity to do so. That was, you know, for me, was perfect. I was like, you know, not stepping into boots. You know, it's like actually there's opportunity to make it new, and that doesn't mean throwing everything away, but it definitely, you know, was appealed to me.
For me, that was massive, because you don't want to come into, you say, somebody else's boots, somebody else's wardrobe, and go, oh, okay, I'd quite like to have put my mark on that new site, or, you know, had a conversation. And, you know, we were going, well, the funny, you know, what you were saying at the start, Chris, about typography, me and Clayton would be in the same slide step going, how about this font? No, I like this one. What about this? And it was just like, there's points when I was like, am I going to have to pull rank here and say to him, I don't know. But it was a funny way of getting to know each other, wasn't it? It was like just exploring stuff.
A type off.
Yeah, it was a type off, yeah.
But,
and it's like, man.
Dan, did you feel, because of Output and the other businesses that were involved in the portfolio, because that had come to an end, did you feel more, and the same for you, Clayton, as well, because you've been through so many other roles, you just felt much more at ease and more pragmatic about doing it again? It wasn't like having to prove yourself. You know, like when we're younger, we all sort of try and create the next big thing that's going to be on the cover of, you know, Creative Review at that point. And it was a bit more like sort of wanting to stamp your feet and show what you're made of. Was it a bit more a case of like, now we can be a bit more, you know, we can take our time a little bit more, we can sort of do what's right. You know, we were talking about earlier, we touched on principles, building those principles. When you first start out, it's sort of, I used to feel like you just followed the herd, but when you get to a certain age, you can sort of actually say, I now know what I want to stand for, even though that develops and changes over time.
Yeah.
You're sort of maybe not as fussed about what the outside world thinks. And it's because,
yeah, I mean, I've not, I know what you mean, Chris, because we talked about this a couple of weeks ago a little bit, didn't we? I mean, I've not, so I'm not on Instagram, never have been, never been on Twitter, because I think I've got my fingers burnt really early days on Facebook. I just thought, I can't be asked for this. I'm too sort of private a person. I'm fine being kind of outward in a business sense, but personally, it's like no. So I think for me, it wasn't about any of those things really. It was more around looking at it as a business. Well, two things: looking at it as a business and going, there's so much potential here, both in the marketplace, in the team we've got, in, you know, what I see in Clayton and some of the other new people we brought in, but also for me, just going, I'm done with running loads of different businesses and solving other people's problems. And you know, that was right at the time. But, you know, for me thinking, right, all that stuff that I've learned, all those, you know, mistakes I've made along the way, what I've taken from that, you know, now putting it into one place where I'm so far away from the tools, literally to the point where, you know, I could turn a PC on and that's it. I would not know anything more than that. And I see that as a, you know, so then for me, it's like, right, I'm running a creative business, which I really enjoy. I can take the lessons from all these other worlds, but, you know, use that to kind of mold and shape a team and kind of, you know, coach them to be this amazing thing with an outcome that we don't yet know. And that was really exciting for me. And also knowing, you know, particularly from Output, that it was in amazing hands with Gemma and Joe, who, as you know, you spoke to a couple of weeks ago, Chris, and, you know, it's kind of given them the next step. So it's it's all worked out okay so far, and it kind of energized me, you know. And I think it's particularly through COVID. I'm sure everyone is, you know, we all had our challenges with businesses and home and family and all that sort of stuff. And you know, when we were moving out an office and kind of figuring out what to do with 4 businesses, and it was just like, oh man, you know, it was good to get that all done, but then think, well, okay, for the first time in about 20 years, going, okay, what do I want? And that sounds selfish, but it's kind of, you have run a business for so long, or several businesses, you're thinking about other people a lot, which, you know, is part of the remit, but it can be easy to sort of, you know, not think about actually what you want, and also where you're going to do your best work, you know, and provide the most value to that business.
Yeah, I find that really refreshing and empowering, because the idea that I think we get drilled into, it's like if a business ends or your involvement in it at a higher end, that's just sort of deemed as some sort of failure. But the idea that output just takes on a new life, doesn't it? Those two guys driving it in different directions, with still the same sort of underlying ethos, but with their own personalities injected in it. And the same with Found, isn't it? That's just, you know, it just goes, you know, it's not like a bad thing, is it? It's just sort of handing it over to people that are maybe best suited for it at the time.
I think so, Chris. And it's, you know, everyone's different, right? It's, I think for me, it was, you know, it would have made me really sad if output couldn't continue, because we put a lot into it. But also we had an amazing team there who I knew could kind of do something with it. And similarly with Found, it was like, well, there's, you know I can add a lot to it by being on it full time. And again, not in a kind of Billy Big Bollocks way, just a sort of like, well, I'm doing 1 or 2 days a week on it. If I'm doing 5, you know, there's a hell of a lot more I can add and, you know, learn from other people. And that was the thing, really. It was kind of, and I suppose it was a new challenge, right? You know, for me, it was a challenge of, right, I want to, you know, when I go into something, I want to learn, and I want to learn how everything works. Not to the point of knowing how to work cinema, because even Clayton doesn't do that. It's, but you know what I mean? It was kind of like, I need to get this well, but then see where my knowledge from other worlds can provide a point of difference, or just, you know, help us and help our clients and help the team, you know.
Yeah.
I think then that's it. Like we feel that, you know, and so the kind of the focus would be very different, I think, if there was still a split, and that it's noticed by the team and noticed by, you know, the availability and the fact that we can talk and we can do, you know, Dan and I will ramble a lot, and you're getting a little insight into this now, but, you know, and you've got to, and I think that we do that if we're in the office, but we tend to do it, you know, when we're remote as well. And it's like that kind of finding where everyone sits and finding, you know, what level, what your ambitions are, and what the drive is, what, you know, where we go in. And I think that you only really find that. And it's a luxurious position to be in that you can kind of, you know, the studio's ticking over, you know, we've got projects and we're busy, but there's definitely means that we've got room to kind of investigate that. And, you know, Dan comes at it from his perspective, and, you know, I've kind of joined that, segued in, and, you know, we sound each other out on those steps and like what the journey might look like. So yeah, I mean, it's only like Dan says, 13 months, but it feels like a hell of a lot longer in a good way. You know, the amount of stuff that we've done. And I think the rebrand is something that, you know, it showed some intent on what we've said before now, you know, that this idea of next chapter, and, you know, and so I think it's like that, all of that kind of, for the team and for those that were there before the change and the junction in time, you know, goes to show what the intent is, you know.
Yeah, so from obviously we're talking now about, obviously, to you two guys from the inside, but from anyone looking from the outside into Found, can you just sort of give us a bit of an overview of what it is you guys are, that those principles that you stand for, what it is you want to achieve?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we're all of the above. So, you know, for those that heard what, you know, the journeys that we've come from, you know, Dan and I have kind of kindred spirits in a way on the design side of things. So, you know, what we've got a legacy of filmcraft, and, you know, that's something that we, you know, are not resetting, and it's something that we love, that the grammar of film and the you know, the CG aspect of that can bring the animation side of things into line with that. But we do describe ourselves as being design led. Now, that's not that we are in the branding game, but we take all of the skills and what we believe are quite transferable experiences into the work that we produce. So if we say that we're design led, that means that we have, the attention to detail is absolutely top notch. The fact that little things like dealing with typography, we understand that and how important that is for pieces of work that we produce. But it's the sensibility around design that we're really keen to talk about, and to make sure that from a client perspective, attention to detail and quality of finish, but also just that concepting and having a good idea before you jump in and start making. So it's design led. Innovation is another point that we refer to as an edge. So as a studio, you've got the film craft and you've got the CG, but what are we kind of propping that up with? So the design led edge, and then the idea of innovation. In our world, we're finding that we can be innovative with the tools that we use and the software that we produce our work with, but we're also innovative by the people that we get to collaborate with. If we have a client that comes to us with a bit of kit that we've never heard of, and be it a television or a phone for Google, or there's things that are going on inside there that you need to understand from a tech team that makes us think in a particular way that keeps us relevant, keeps us on the pulse, but also allows us to try and find what the most innovative way to describe that is. So,
and I think the key thing with it always, and it's something I've kind of learned the hard way and at points in output, is it's like, well, yeah, we could do this, but why? So we've done a big push in the studio at the moment on Houdini, so everyone's done courses for that, and it's good to see that starting to come through in the work, because actually the guys are learning, if you like, the cliches of growing foliage and kind of clouds and things like that, but actually it's coming through on real life projects where those visual solutions aren't needed, but they're seeing it elsewhere. And we're starting to sort of look at that with Unreal as well, to go, well, okay, what does this mean to our practice right now? And then therefore, where could it take us? And I think the other thing is we've some of the projects we've taken on, like we've done something in the NFT space, but in a very sort of commercial trading cards place, but it's enabled us to learn about that space, learn about, okay, there are cleaner ways of doing it than some of the other ways, but also just to sort of start to get and understand. I'm certainly not going to claim to be an expert of where this whole metaverse thing might go. And, and that's the kind of thing where, we need to understand that, even if we never work in it, because that's, the sort of, the kind of the teenagers of today are going to live in a very different world to us, certainly to the one I was in. So,
we're lucky to be able to have those, like that variety of projects. I think is something that we're both really, really interested in, not specializing down to we only make 40-second TV ads for tech companies. It's like, actually we're very lucky in that we get a variety of briefs. Sometimes they push us.
Yeah, and it's also deliberate, right? Because it's the Google project was amazing, but we're like, we can't do that every 3 months because we'll be dead. Anyway, but at the same time, you can't do the kind of cool R&D things all the time because we'll be skint. So it's and that's, to be honest, that's something I've had throughout the businesses of trying to have that balance. But I think it's an interesting thing to start plotting. Well, yeah, what kind of what sort of what kind of clients and brands do you want to tick off, but what kind of causes do you want to tick off? What sort of, why do we want to be doing this stuff? What sort of messages and stories do we want to tell outside of selling people lumps of plastic? It's
and that comes from the team too, right, Dan? I think the third edge really is the just to round that off is we're team focused. The people that make the work.
Love the
people that, I'll get a job on radio, I reckon. But those designers, those producers, those marketing team members, I think that it's all kind of what makes Found what it is. And I think that we need to listen to what they want to do as well, to some extent. Like, we're open to that discussion. And I think that we've got people that come from very different backgrounds to what Dan and I have just described. And I think that we're open to that and interested in what that can bring. Not that it's free reign and we make whatever anyone wants to make, but it is, you're not, if you're going to be closed down and closed doors and say that this is the studio direction and that's it, I'm afraid, like it or lump it, then, you know, you lose people along the way, but you also just, you know, don't benefit from that different way of thinking. So
yeah. I was looking at your website. Sorry, Dan, I was looking at the website recently. I think that team aspect comes across really, really clearly. Well, it did to me, you know, from introducing the people that you've just hired, or you talking about your away day, for instance. I mean, that's quite clearly part of what the studio represents, and that sounds dead obvious, but that's not always very visible with all other studios or other agencies or businesses of any sort. You know, so that's, to me, that must be a real nice space for people to be in, to have that.
Well, I'm glad you picked up on it, Chris, because it was one of the, when I was starting to think about the rebrand. And by the way, Chris, we can go beyond 11:45. Is that?
Yeah, I've got all day. Everybody else tuning in's happy about that.
Right. Go and get the kettle on. So yeah, hope everyone's all right with that.
£20 a ticket now.
It's going to charge you double soon. So I think, yeah, that was a real big part. So one of the things that I was really keen to do with this rebrand was start to show people a bit behind the curtain, because, you know, the world we're in is quite closed off. And, you know, for us, I needed to, well, my belief and certainly my sort of reflection through lockdown is, you know, I didn't want to run a remote first business. I spoke to people like Yambo, and, you know, he was very good with his time in terms of sharing how they work. And I thought, that's really interesting, but that's not for me. I've not had people in a studio for 20 years, you know, to kind of stop doing that. But also, you know, for me, it was like, well, I didn't want to manufacture a culture, but needed a place for it just to start to kind of percolate. And actually, if people were interested in working for us, then they could go, well, I'm gonna have a wander in this part of the site and just get a flavour for it. So it's quite passive content. It's not there to sort of shove down three people's throats and go, hey, aren't we fun and cool? It's like, well, if you think that, fine. If you don't, it doesn't really matter. This is if you're that 0.5% of people looking at the site who are interested in working, then this could be interesting. Same for clients. And it's the same with some of the content Clayton and I have written. I mean, that used to be one of my remits years ago at Output, was writing thought pieces. And I was like, oh, fuck, I hate this, because I'm not, as I said, I'm a very private person. And if I have opinions on things going on in the world, I'm pretty private with those. And I always found this notion of having to sort of write on demand and be that kind of thing problematic. But I think through our kind of Friday ramblings, right, Clayton, the sort of things start to come out, and you get to a point, it's like, right, I want to talk about how we've changed the working and the IT stuff, because I just want to put it down. If it's interesting to someone, great. If it isn't, it doesn't really matter. No one's going to tear us apart for it. And I think it's just helped to sort of, for me, almost kind of articulate the evolution of the studio by writing things down. Sometimes it makes them a bit more like, okay,
putting money where your mouth is as well, isn't it? You know, in a way, and for the team, you know, that the whole studio section of the website is, yeah, it's outward facing, of course it is, but it's also, you know, that I would speak to one of the designers and say, I need you to write a little bit of something for this because it's going live, you know, and actually this is your moment at this point in time to own a little bit of how we communicate. And I think that feels like a nice thing to be able to do, because I never really got that before. It was always you'd follow the party line, you know, with studios that you're at, and work gets put out as and when it's decided. And I think that we've got a culture now. I'd like to think that work's being produced and that there's a desire to be able to get it on the studio next, and that's absolutely fine with names attached, you know.
Yeah.
So it's
we wanted a space where one last thing. We wanted a space where we could also talk about things from a creative point of view that weren't case studies and weren't Instagram. And I think we kind of played around with studio culture stuff on Instagram, and it just felt like it was a bit kind of, it kind of grated sometimes. So that was the purpose for it. Sorry, I'll let you speak, Chris.
Yeah, I thought it felt much more like a magazine more than anything. You know, like a New Generation magazine, where we sort of, I don't know about you guys, but I sort of collect them. They're a bit more expensive. They're like coffee table magazines, aren't they, really? It had that sort of feel to it, as opposed to, I've always noticed the trend, especially when I was first starting out, it had agencies that were private to the point where they very rarely updated a website. So right across the ones that had employed non-creative business people to write blog posts. And it was always loaded with buzzwords, and the articles were just way too long, and it was just a bit like OTT. But this seems to fit in a mould. Maybe it's just my personal preference, but it fits in that something that you collect. If it was printed, it's something that you keep hold of. It would be a volume of snippets.
Yeah, I think for us, Chris, I think it's a time and an age and an experience thing where you're like, yeah, I'm just comfortable this being my voice now, and it not having to fit to don't get me wrong, there is a very sort of structured content plan and market plan, all those kind of things, but these things, when they're ready, right, Clayton? And like what was the latest one you wrote? Was it off the back of Off, wasn't it, where you would you'd read it,
taking the team out on stage and inviting them to speak as part of the studio, not just the leadership team or me being wheeled out on stage to do these sorts of things. So yeah, it's timely, and it's not that we say we have to have one a month, because I think that's really dangerous, and that's when you start to get the bump.
That's a good point, Clayton. And to take it back to a kind of my world of sort of raw business objectives, Chris, it was I felt that it was, for us, we needed to create something around the brand, if you like, beyond the work, where people would go, that's an interesting place to work. That looks different to these other places. I'm curious about that. And also for the team who are here to go, this is going to make me stay longer, because I'm getting celebrated, because I'm getting called out, because I'm, getting training because of this and that. It was there's a conscious thing of like, well, we're celebrating people because we value the people and we want the people to stay, It's kind of, we can all go and work and silly money freelance on day rate, but do we want to do that? And that's, if people do, great. If people don't, then also great. It's just trying to sort of paint the picture of the culture without saying, here's the culture. Because you know what I mean? It's sort of, you just got to let that stuff kind of live for itself, and then people can judge it rather than going, hey, we're super cool, look at this.
Yeah, well, that's become a bit of another buzzword, hasn't it? Culture in design or studios, especially.
I think you just need a table tennis table and you got it, right?
We've got a dartboard now, haven't we? I've got
a dartboard.
I've got a limited pot noodles. That hasn't worked for me.
Chris, I'll join your studio, mate. I love that.
How do you go about that in a sense of, I presume that's part of the selection of who you choose when you've got opportunities for new availability for staff, and the way that I presume they're part of the whole brand, the tone of voice, the inclusivity. What is that? Is that something you have to really work at, or does it just come quite naturally?
It takes a lot of thought, because it's there's so many facets to that. Whether that's kind of more so nowadays than it used to be, or I think that actually there's a lot of conscious thinking that goes on around who joins a team, and that's first and foremost they've got to be up to scratch creatively, technically. But I think and I'm getting emails pinged through just now because we've just joined Creative Lives in Progress, which is allowing us to kind of open up to those far-flung corners that adverts or opportunities don't tend to reach. And that's something we're kind of, I think we'd hold our hands up and say we're kind of quite early days into, but it's something we're on the case with. And it's exciting to have new members of the team join, but in and around that, it's like, well, you've got to speak to people, for one. You've got to meet these people, because they need to work as people as much as they need to work as an operator. And I think that that's it. The criteria is just can be as limited as that. It's a matter of doing the research and making sure that when we do offer an opportunity, that it gets out to the right places and as far as possible.
In your line of, or your niche of creative industries, is that, because I don't have much exposure to that, is that quite difficult to find? And like, say, graphic design, branding, it seems to be a plethora of people available all of the time from where I sort of stand. From a motion 3D film perspective, is that a bit more difficult, or is it just a smaller, more talented pool?
It's definitely a smaller one, Clayton, isn't it?
It's smaller, but it's enlarging, and I think that it comes down to availability of software almost. Like what's the accessibility on the tools? Do and I think that the CG world, be it VFX or motion graphics, I think has always been a bit more apprenticeship based, and you need to kind of be at a studio and kind of see it happening and learn on the big bits of kit, in-house. Whereas now you kind of like with trial licenses and, even on Houdini, which we're kind of getting up to speed on, is something that, people can get hold of really early on. And I think we're seeing that shift actually in the interns that we're bringing in right now are interestingly, obviously learning from the experience of those above them, but also imparting knowledge of things that they've had time to really dive into. So, we don't have any Unreal artists in-house, but we kind of have now with one of our interns, which is brilliant in that they can start to really show everybody what they can do, bring the studio along a little, in that kind of, in that sphere. But yeah, having had the luxury of time, whilst they're at college or, in their own time to be able to better that skill. So
you pick up a really interesting point there, Clayton, because this was a realization I had probably a couple of years ago. Found was like, we're paying $5-6 grand for a Houdini and cinema license, but you can get it for pretty much nothing, at that bottom end. And meanwhile you're trying to find, say, a Houdini person, you're looking 354, 500 a day. You don't know what they're going to be like, whether they're going to be technical or design. So I'd sort of figured out fairly early on that if we can develop a sort of bottom-up pipeline of talent, then we could spend a fortune on training people, and we're still going to have we're going to be in a better place than hiring somebody who's already at that level. And as you say, Clayton, being kind of excited by like, fuck, they're half my age. Look what they're doing. That's incredible, Like this morning on our daily stand-up, Carolus, one of the interns, was saying, this wallpaper project, moving into Unreal today. And I was so excited by that. I was just thinking, I wonder what the other designers think about that. There's this guy that's been here a couple of months. It's pretty quiet, just like bang, and that's kind of what you want. You want people going, oh, okay, I need to, I want to have a look at this, So there's a little bit of friendly competition, but more a kind of curiosity where they'll get on your, what's the channel you have for all this stuff, Clayton? Would you call that?
Well, we call it Motion Squad. It's like a kind of locked Slack channel that they can sort of speak freely about nodes and.
Yeah, getting's not allowed in, right? But that's the kind of that they'll be buzzing on that. And there's one of the reasons I took Clayton on was because of that education and supporting background, because I knew that that's what we needed, was to kind of probe people and encourage them to learn off each other as much as anything, and it not be a battle, it not be a kind of that sort of thing. It being a friendly place where people can go, cool, how'd you do that? Can you chuck me that shader over? What about that tutorial? And that's because CG designers are like devs in that respect. I think that they always need to be learning because things change so quickly.
Yeah.
But they need the eye as well, which is the real challenge.
Clayton, do you think that from a generational perspective that say 10 years back, people were being born into a world that is just full of motion? Like when you both referenced, when you started out or at school education, it was, or art, that was the same for me. There was no graphic design at school.
Right.
It was then when I went to college, I first heard it, stood in a room full of Macs, and people told us that they'd never turn one on, didn't know how to use it because it was all new. Now that's sort of really old hat, and there's younger designers are creating stuff that I'm just sort of sitting there going, how have they come up with that? Because just they've got handed by it permanently.
I think that it's very, very different, and I think that there's education, maybe. It's definitely how readily available the intelligence around making something move has become, and I think that was, even though I was on a pathway from year one at, LCP, I still didn't come out, industry ready by a long stretch. I had to do, a number of kind of jobs where I just kind of actually mess up quite badly, along the way, and have your, your wrist slapped on certain things, frame rates or whatever it was. I learned that way, and managed to kind of hold a job down to be able to learn. But I think now that even if you're not on a design course, there's an intelligence around how to make something move, or how to kind of post TikTok, how Instagram stories, and posts that kind of deal with reels and cutting things together gain more traction than something that's just a still.
Yeah.
It's just, I think it's just in the air for sure. And if you can kind of latch hold of that and start from that base level, then you're already already ahead of where I was when I was coming out of college, for sure.
That's right. You're essentially editing a film now on probably the most basic smartphone, versus even 10 years ago, you'd need Final Cut or After Effects to edit anything, wouldn't you? And then maybe iMovie came in and it was democratized it a little bit more. But it's, the tools are so easy to use, and so they're just part of a young person's kind of handwriting, I suppose.
Life skills. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah. You're right. Just, that's just what you do when you post stuff, right?
And there'll be a time where, we've all got VR headsets, or better still, XR glasses that are more slimline. But that'll just be, well, I know for sure that, the next generation of smartphones are not phones at all. They are, wearables. And that's something we've, again, got to kind of keep tabs with, because if we're not making squares that get posted onto TikTok, LinkedIn, Instagram, etc., then what are we making, and what does that need to be made in? And I think that's happening already. I mean, even me saying that now, it's not groundbreaking, but the next generation or the one after will be coming out of college already going, well, I can do this in my, up here on my glasses right now. So what are they going to be learning? Like, what's the kind of future projection from that? So without going down a technology wormhole, I think it's just what we're surrounded by. And if we're surrounded by beautiful books that are printed, and then we understand the magic behind a Heidelberg press, then that's one kind of thing that was just in the ether at that point in time. Typography now is like that. Those things kind of get slightly forgotten, and we could do a whole kind of another half hour on understanding fundamentals before you start going in and breaking them. But I think it's really exciting. It's quite daunting as well for the likes of us, and I think that's why we do feel like we need to build a team that can ensure that the studio stays on the pulse, and that and I think we've got the interest. You and I, Dan, and with Felix and Helena, as a part of the leadership team, there's definitely an interest in keeping that, keeping our foot in, even if we don't go whole hog right now. We're just going to do VR.
But also, I think I try and preach the thing of like we don't have to be the experts. Let's bring the experts in. We need to be the expert to the client, but we don't. I guess what I'm saying is, leaders, we don't have to have all the answers, because let's use the group mind of the team. Let's figure that out. The things that are happening on social media now, then the interns are going to know most about that, not so definitely not me.
I think what's most important is they've got to people. It's all right having the kit. It's all right having the latest Samsung that can kind of splice a video together. But if you're just doing it and creating Instagram candy and material that just goes off into the ether and gets scrolled past because it's the same as the last bit that you scroll past, same tool, no idea, then it's going to look the same and have the same response. And I think it's crucial, I suppose, if there's any nuggets of wisdom to be imparted here, is that the concept and the idea is the training that's needed. And I think that's even though I didn't come out being able to operate a camera or edit in Premiere, I knew how to think and research and put a sketchbook together and be able to stand my ground when I was questioned about what it is you're making. Yeah. And that, even if it was a DVD menu, you're still dealing with clients, and there's an output for that. But just getting into the mode of talking about an idea, how to communicate an idea really clearly, that's what people should be learning. And then I think, as we've just said, everything else is just surrounding you already, and you've got the means to realize it.
Nice. Like I say, it could go on for an extra session on its own, couldn't it? Just talking about those more details. Something I'm really interested in is the public speaking that you do as a studio. At bigger events, like you mentioned earlier, off quite large, very large scale industry respected events. Was that something that you purposefully put in place down when sort of rebranding found, or did that come from your background with things like blog and those live experiences and how beneficial they are?
Well, do you know what, Chris? I think it's so. Mike, who was Clayton's predecessor, he's a great public speaker, and he enjoyed getting on stage. He was very good at it, and we got some good gigs pre-lockdown. He spoke in Prague. He spoke at a Maxon event in Amsterdam, and I think it's something that having been involved in Glug, I knew the value of it at times, in terms of sort of spreading the word about the studio. You know, for me, the best thing about Glug was meeting people, and kind of like, you know, you'd have found the same, Chris, realizing that actually we're all muddling away together, and you know, we're all just people you could go for a coffee with or go for a pint with. There's some people who aren't like that, but you know what I mean. It's sort of, we're not sat in kind of ivory towers, and that's what I liked about events, is you just, you know, you can meet someone who's new to the industry or someone who you've, you know, really look up to. So I was chatting to Michael a while back, who used to work for Vaughan Oliver, and he was someone I met at an exhibition nearly 20 years ago. We're out in France. I was like, this is amazing. And we were just getting pissed with him and his wife. And I didn't study design, so I didn't know much about Vaughan Oliver, but people were like, fuck, do you know who that is? And it's like, yeah, it's this Geordie bloke who's just mad, and it's brilliant. You know? And that's kind of, I'm going off topic here, aren't I? So going back to talk. So I think for us, it was something that we'd always done as a business. And, you know, I felt that it was important to have someone who wanted to do that kind of thing. But didn't sort of, but also I didn't want to shove it down their throat if they weren't a kind of public speaking person. And I don't know how much we talked about it in the sort of interview process, Clayton, but I guess you can tell the way someone talks just generally and their interest that it was important. But I think, you know, the Forward Festival stuff, we'd already started the titles and were part of that thing pre-lockdown, and then it all got put on ice. So Clayton, you know, that was there to be picked up, but we said, well, if we're going to do this, there's no point in just finishing off what was done pre-Clayton and pre a lot of the team. So kind of went at it again, and that's ended up being a bigger thing. I can't remember, how did Off come about? They just get in touch in the summer, Clayton? I can't remember.
Well, it's just down to relationships, isn't it? And as you said, like people that you meet, but Hector, who runs it, I think has always been kept in touch with Helena. Exactly. So those things come about, and then before you know it, you know, and then out in Seville when we spoke it off, you know, and that was again not just me, but you know, me having been able to bring someone else along and rehearse and have another member of the team on stage and give them that experience too. That, you know, we met the guys from off Vienna.
And with Ryan, so Ryan, one of our creative leads, he's one of the few who's been with us a few years, and you'd have never thought he'd someone who'd be interested in getting anywhere near a stage. So, you know, for him to do this, for Clayton to get him to do it, for the guys to do a cracking job on it, it was amazing experience for him. Whether he'd do it again, I don't know, but I imagine there's an element of sort of bucket list to him of doing that as well, because it's, you know, motion designers in particular off is the, you know, it's the zenith, right?
It was an honour to stepping up onto that stage and having been invited. So yeah, I think it's you know, it's really, really lucky to be able to do that. But we met, you know, members of the Off Vienna team. We're meeting other people, you know, from different studios, different type studios, gritty type, monotype, you know, which emails and kind of goodwill and good feeling after that kind of really kind of lasts. And I think that, you know, it's networking as much as it is, you know, networking off the stage as much as it is projecting what the studio's about. And, you know, so I think we pick up as much in the aftermath, in the conversations that kind of come, you know, in the foyer after, as they do from people kind of taking a video clip and posting it on social media, you know.
And it's a bit of a busman's holiday as well, right? It's kind of, it's nice to be away. It's nice to be, you know, but it's not just a paid jolly, because, well, particularly for Seville, you guys were mega busy, weren't you? You did that half-day photography, CG workshop.
Yeah, we ran workshop. That's it. And then the, you know, the interviews that come with it. So we were then interviewed by El Pais, the Sunday Times magazine of Spain, you know, which is like a 2.5 hour interview with a journalist via an interpreter. You know, it's like, so there's definitely that of the evening, a nice meal and a few beers out in town, but you know, they're really, we're daft to just go and have a holiday. I think it's so much rich, you know, connections and networking to be had within the space, and seeing other people talk. How do they do it? You know, how's another studio putting together what they do? And you know, because I think in those moments where you've got an hour on stage, that you really do get to see truly what people want to say about themselves, but you know, revealing those processes. And I think, you know, I as much as we kind of try and build a team that has a varied background, I think that we're, you know, looking at references that are outside of CG, outside of graphic design, like think, how does an architect plan a project? That's so intriguing to me, and I think that's something that those festivals are brilliant for, because you get goodness knows who's going to come up on stage next. They kind of make physical. Like the people talking before us, they Las Animas they're called, and they produce fiberglass models. They've got a massive studio where they just work in fiberglass. So they're designing in 3D, right? They're doing what we're doing, but they're just doing it, and they're actually getting their hands dirty and need to wear hazmat suits and stuff.
I think it's really interesting. I've spoken to a lot of younger people about the concept of networking, and it's quite it's just comes with the stigma, doesn't it? I don't know, Glug did a big sort of thing to break that sort of down, didn't it? That was really part of one of the main parts of Glug, well, it seems to be from the outside. Correct me if I'm wrong, Dan, but this idea that
yeah, and do you know what? And I think the thing with Glug, so the kind of almost the sort of, I mean, we might have talked about this for me, I can't remember, but the reason we did it is, so me, Rob and Ian, who set up Output, Ian was a club promoter. He used to run all the student nights in Nottingham. Like, I'm talking like 2,500 people in Ritzy's drinking cocktails out of like bins. That sort of level. We're talking pound a pint days. And me and Rob would design. Ian used to come in and I would design his flyers. And this is how old it was, Chris. I would sit there with a fag in my mouth, ashtray on top of my Mac, designing flyers all day. It was horrible. But that was how we started. So we were just, because we were in that sense of, we were just used to promoting, even if it was like cheesy student nights, for us to sort of market ourselves a lot, which we was used to with Output, to come down to London. And our thing with London was like, well, we're not getting invited to these events, so let's just put our own one on and see what happens. And that was kind of, as kind of glib as that sounds, that was how it started, because we knew we could, we could do Rent a Crowd, and we could start things like that. But actually, I think also the more you do it, then, as you say, you don't know who you're going to meet or what you're going to talk about, and that's interesting. Like this, right, Chris? You must be. You get so much nutrition from random things and people and stories you come across.
Yeah, well, exactly that. I feel like even just in this last couple of weeks talking to Joe and Gemma, I never knew that connection before we had the prep talk, before the conversation, before we did this. So it's just amazing how I find that so enthralling to know. Like, I see so much good work that it all just sort of blurs into one a little bit. You get to see everywhere you look, you go, that's great, that's good, that's brilliant, that's great. But it's sort of it numbs you a little bit. But to know the story and the people behind it, it's fascinating, because you learn from just within this hour and 9 minutes has been more empowering for me than probably looking at your website for the next 5 years would be, because it's just giving me that insight into how you've done it, and potentially I could then digest that and pass that to somebody else that might be younger, looking for that support network. Well, like Michael has put on a private message here about connecting with us privately to me, and it's that's where those relationships start, isn't it? And really, when you strip back all of the stuff about work, processes, culture, all that sort of stuff, with all of these talks, it's always about relationships. And that seems to be personality, relationships, networks is the fundamentals for all sorts of business and life, isn't it?
And like, I guess the genesis of you starting Right Align, Chris, is just asking people, right? Because it's like, as soon as, I don't know where Giants roam, but as soon as it popped on, said, guys, I'd love to meet you, love your work, love what you're doing. What I didn't say is, imagine being on the edge of a lake and that being your place of work. Awesome. It's things like that, just going, well, and I think that's one of the big things that remote has given us, is you can just go, I'm going to send this person a message. It's like, and you can just have a 2-sentence chat on LinkedIn and you've made a connection, or Instagram, whatever your mode is. I kind of, the thought of having to do all these things in person now is a bit of a pain in the arse. We talked about it, Chris, haven't we, in terms of going that way. I think it's, more sort of micro things, you can get more from it, and that's, partly that's my age and me not being in London, but I don't know, we're sort of seeing that even with some of our team, Clayton, aren't we? That it's not necessarily younger ones that are in the studio all the time. It depends on the mode of work and where they're at in the job. I don't want to segue there, Chris, but
No, I think going back to that, it's more a case I found it's about now fulfilling yourself from what you want, and that goes back to that why and those principles, and not trying to play up to the crowd. I posted something earlier about falling victim of years ago, designing for Instagram, and then followers, then designing for what the industry wanted as opposed to what I wanted. And I've got used to not trying to please everybody else, but just please myself and what myself my personal curiosities and all those sorts of things. And if other people like that and other people are interested, that's a bonus, because then it's authentic and comes from the heart and it's genuine and people can believe it, as opposed to wanting to host the biggest event because it looks good somewhere in the internet, as opposed to it actually satisfying me and delivering something valuable to the people that I'm aiming at.
And this is it, Chris. It's sort of like if you're always trying to attain that that kind of next thing, you're never going to be there. I remember reading something around, and it just dawned on me, I'm not going to go down the rabbit hole of it, but pitching, and I was reading something, I was realizing, well, Brad Pitt's got to read for an audition versus somebody else. There's always a kind of, there can always be that sense of competition. There can always be, Elvis has sold more records than Elton John. It's that sort of, there's always kind of, if you want to keep attaining stuff, there is that, if you want to go for that. But for me, it was more like, well, let's be, this is going to sound super cheesy, let's be the best we can be, but kind of, I've always tried to encourage Clayton to say, don't just concentrate on us. What we think and our idea, rather than trying to kind of look at the world around you, because that is I think the danger of, well, not even the danger of social media. I mean, it was there 20 years ago when people like you and me, Chris, were probably on like QBN and News Today and all those sort of old design blogs where you kind of you want to be in that little chat room and all that bollocks. It's
it's a good place to leave it.
Yeah, right. I was thinking this is a hell of a last parting gift, isn't it?
Yeah, no, it's really, really appreciate it. I think it's, like I say, with all of these, it's always my pleasure just to hear from everybody else and get something out of it. And if it passes, that filters down to other people, or potentially people that might watch this at a later date or ask for recordings, etc. But that's what it's there designed to do. It's I don't think there's anything wrong with sharing insight and knowledge and experiences.
Absolutely.
I'm too much of a sharer sometimes, but I think even just we find this, Clayton, don't we? Even just talking like this, you end up meandering into places that you wouldn't have perhaps intended to, and that can be interesting.
Sure. And also, like, with the way the world is at the minute and people going through difficult times, and working remotely is great for some things, but from a mental perspective or an isolation perspective, it's not great for everybody. And I've found that these talks are quite therapeutic in some sort of way. They allow me to sort of align myself ironically with what I want to do and put you in a happier place than just falling into that hole of social media or internet in general. It's sort of just, I think hopefully it unites a few people for a small amount of time, and over a longer period of time that will just hopefully become stronger and people can use it as a way to guide themselves moving forward.
Yeah, well, I hope so, Chris. Yeah, I mean, it's I enjoy talking like this. I know there's only a few people. Has anyone got any questions? I know everyone's cameras off. I assume that's like a setting thing, but happy to keep talking bollocks if people want to know stuff.
Everyone's frantically typing away. let me add a couple of questions.
Clayton, I assume you're all right with questions.
There you go. That's a direct one.
Michael,
you put me on the spot here, Michael, because I've got you.
Well, we have to follow process, but no, send your work to. Let me see. Let me just put it in here.
I can send you Michael's portfolio, Clayton. Yeah, I think we spoke. When did we speak? I think it was when we hired Kieran. I think we were looking for someone much. I think it was Kieran's a senior we hired recently. I think the thing with it is we're in the process of planning what our kind of growth strategy is at the moment, Clayton, aren't we? So I think and this is something we didn't pick up on, but it's nice to be in a business where you can actively plan growth because you've got foreseeable and forecastable income, which means conversations like this for you, Michael, we can start to go, well, actually, this is when there's a position opening up and this is the kind of shape it might be. But I think what's also interesting is we're starting to see I saw somebody this week who's, designed, but actually has moved into 3D themselves a bit as well. And I think that's interesting because of all the stuff we've spoken about, Clayton. But sometimes we need someone who is a hardcore on the tools CG person. Sometimes we might go, actually, we want a bit of a disruptor here. We want a bit of a different thinker.
Or someone who can lead versus someone who just gets the headphones on and gets on. I think that there's there's lots of different aspects to it. But it starts with just sending what your intentions are, and what your real is, and where you come from. I think that's and we get back to people as much as we possibly can on that jobs@foundstudio.com. So if that's of interest to anybody else, then but yeah.
So the short answer,
carrying the conversation, Michael.
The short answer, Michael, is the door's open, but it's not open very much at the moment because there's not. Yeah.
Just having to think about the future. Do you think dot motion will just become pretty much the standard format with things like Instagram becoming so much more heavily focused towards that sort of way? That stills becoming very much sort of dead and buried out there. Obviously, in a branding perspective, you'd need stills for certain aspects of but in terms of the most strongly used format, I think that would that would become the norm.
There's a good example out there at the moment in that out in Dubai, and I only know this because I worked on a pavilion myself, but also my wife's there at the moment working at World Expo. And World Expo is obviously that meant to be the forefront of innovations from brands, countries, and technologies, and different kind of systems. And I think there's not a printed panel in these spaces, and there are two that I know of anyway. The information is presented as you would like it in Arabic, in English, in German, in Russian, in Mandarin. It's and I think that there's just, I suppose, in an event like that, it's global and it needs to be flexible. It needs to respond. You can't print that, otherwise you need the entire pavilion to put everyone's language up. But I don't think, and I hate to think that everything has to move and has to be digested on a screen. I think that a bit like the resurgence in vinyl, there's appreciation for craft, there's appreciation for print as much as there is for good digital content too. In fact, we have a project on at the moment that will eventually end up in print, but we're using Unreal to produce it. So we're kind of really just looking at what. Because the content is about light, that's like, just to kind of close that off, and Unreal's excellent at dealing with that as a medium, as is all software. But I think there's a particular slant on light and what you can do with it, and so that felt right. But when you stand back from it, you're just like, well, this is going to be printed in a book, but we're using the kind of cutting edge of VR and real-time rendering experience for producing.
Reproduce aren't good enough then to sort of show that off then?
Yeah, so we can get the resolution we need out of it to be able to produce imagery that has can be printed. Obviously, you're never going to get the full benefit from an Unreal piece that can be rendered real time and experience, on a headset or on a WebGL platform. But we've got the right tool for the job because it deals with light in a particular way. So I think what I'm saying is that I don't think that print is dead, and I don't think that it's all about screens from this point on. I think that you've got to understand that stuff, to be able to get the most out of something you do produce on screen.
I presume also.
I'm clinging on. I just hate the idea that we become completely projected.
Yeah, well, because I started as a print designer, I think I've noticed more of a shift towards better quality where possible. Like with Smiths and Federagonis, etc. Whereas less is more, isn't it? It's more of an appreciation of the material than it is about filling it with, printed matter just for the sake of, putting a Bible on a postage stamp, for quoting a cliche. But they don't seem to see as much of that where possible. That seems to have just gone online, where clients just want to put tons and tons of text in a small space online. But the printed stuff seems to be much better quality, where it's much more of a keepsake a lot of the time.
Right.
It's a throwaway, just a throwaway piece of marketing.
Which I think is a good thing as well.
But with sustainability and the environment and those hot topics, that has to be the way. I mean, it will still exist in some quarters.
Definitely.
Pizza Express.
I think this is
desperate to.
One of the fascinating things for me is you picked up on it, Clayton, is where does, not even social media, but probably social media as the sort of vanguard, but where does media go? Does it go into headsets? Does it go into I've read some really interesting stuff about the metaverse in a broader sense, in that essentially you're creating, it's obvious it's a virtual world, but you can use that virtual world to, there's a thing called digital twinning, where engineering companies are building digital replicas, say, of a power station to test what happens when it overheats, stresses, all those kind of things. And actually you think, well, if you can start to solve the real world problems in the metaverse, without using resources and time and money and pollution, all that, then there's a kind of, there's a purpose to a lot of this stuff beyond just, I suppose, idle consumption of social media stuff. I mean, I don't know enough about it at the moment, but I find it fascinating and obviously hugely scary and dystopian that our kids, me, Chris and Clayton, could be, their whole world could be not even looking at a screen where we can look over and go, what you're looking at, it's in this thing where you're like, I don't know, they're just, it's like they're sort of, the difference between print and screens is at least it's there in front of you, right? Okay, you put headphones on, you can hide away, but there's a sort of, when it becomes this kind of almost like monologue thing where you don't have access to it, that's kind of, I think what it's going to be interesting, you're going to get this massive generational gap. And I don't know how society's going to handle that.
My concern always is with all of these things is that, say, when you used to deal with, say, local councils and they'd print 10,000, really terrible leaflets, etc., and end up binning 9,000 of them because they didn't use them fast enough. They then, instead of then embracing technology, they then just took that PDF file and stuck it on Instagram. It was literally, just dumped it all on there because they thought that was then being beneficial to the users as well as the planet. When that just becomes a big issue, doesn't it? Is that just a huge amount of noise, which 95% of it is actual trash in it. Yeah. Will that then get transferred to new technologies and people just abuse that because they're too lazy and they haven't got any finance to really do it.
Well, and every brand will want to be seen to be on that pulse, and so they'll produce content for the sake of producing content just to be on it. Yeah. And that's the noise. Then you've got the likes of, I don't know, like vellum cloth in Houdini. If you type that in or hashtag that on Instagram, then that's you for the rest of 2022, just getting through all that content that people have just made it, posted it. So it's claiming, it's land grabbing almost, isn't it? To say I'm doing this, I'm on the case. And I think that it comes back to ideas again, doesn't it? And I think that if an idea is best resolved in a book, poster, screen, XR projection, whatever, it's like I'd want it to be a rich experience and that it's kind of the content's living in a comfortable space, not stuff that's made for the sake of it.
Yeah, I suppose that's potentially that's our, and at the bottom of all this is, if people that care about it, that's our job to sort of try and get others to see it that way, isn't it? As opposed to sort of just nodding and going along with the paycheck because a big brand says, can you just throw this or make this suitable, or can you say this is a JPEG so we can just shove it?
Yeah, and I think we're kind of, I don't want us to sort of come across high and mighty because we're trying to sort of learn how we can do our bit and evolve with the times. But I think you start to see things that are just very frivolous or ostentatious or unnecessary, and I think that's one of the challenges I'm setting myself with the business over the next year, is kind of understand what that means for us and how, we were talking about Unreal as a way of, you just think about Unreal as, and look, this may or may not be the answer, who knows yet, but if we're an Unreal studio only, then you think about cost savings in licenses, but then you also think about all this gear you've got wearing away using loads of electricity rendering. It's like, well, that's not needed anymore apart from at the end. So there's different, it starts to make you think, well, actually there's, how does that affect other parts of the business, the sustainability mission, things like that. And I don't know yet, but it's interesting because you start to look at things through a different lens to what you'd have looked at in the past.
Yeah, but what I find really interesting about that is that how we as creative businesses can use how we would think and do stuff for clients, how we can do that for ourselves and sort of solve those problems. If you probably do that already, but I find that really fascinating, the idea that sometimes we neglect our own things, don't we, because we're so hell-bent on sort of delivering stuff for others.
We were talking about that the other day, Clayton. There's a guy I know, Jonathan Ford, who runs a packaging agency called Pearl Fisher, and they're 30 years old this year, and he wrote a lovely piece recently where he was reflecting on all this time. He had this real moment. I think it was a good few years ago where he was sat on a beach and he realized that he'd designed the stuff that was washing up on this beach. Yeah. And he did a whole piece on it called "I'm a Rubbish Designer." And I just, it just kind of made me think, fuck, that's kind of, that must have been such a massive realization of just like, God, the sort of weight of responsibility, and that's gonna, we're going to be responsible for that in some way. We've talked about it in terms of NFTs and stuff, Clayton, haven't you? But it's, starting to monitor the electricity we use, and there's some of the stuff where, I don't know, when you start to move up to 4K, you think, well, what does that mean for consumption and things like that? And
well, there's interesting bits at the moment, and there's lots being posted around the idea of efficiency, and we always want to be efficient. And like, you can be efficient by having a render farm that will render frames for you, and there's however many nodes means however many frames you can render at any one moment. But that's obviously the more power you need to get them all going. So we've been looking into rendering and using AI in order to get the resolution we require. So like Dan says, 4K there, we can actually work a lot smaller than that, maybe at HD, maybe a little bit below, but use AI to get that up-resed to, and we're getting really, really good results from that. Now that's one thing on resolution. Frame rate is also something else that we can look at playing with that technology. So it doesn't necessarily it sits in the background, right? It's not that it's AI and that's an output that looks like it's been generated by some sort of, what do they call them? Gantt or GAT sort of systems. I think that it's just another tool that allows us, like Adobe would allow us to edit, that these systems allow us to just be much more efficient. They require power, of course, but they don't require anywhere near the power that we'd need to just output things at 10 to 12K, which is some of the requests we're getting. We can work at a kind of lower res, and then be clever with which bits we kind of put through that AI system. So, again, another little bit of not, unique innovation, but innovation in order to just, work on a number of different levels there. And that's really exciting. When you start thinking, well, we start rendering stuff out, a few pixels and 1 frame per second, and actually the system can bring that up and inflate it or, saturate it with what resolution and frame rate you need. I think
that becomes our new designer then, doesn't it? You just make it really low res, see what happens with it, see what it decides it to be.
Well, it's a nice one to try and break, but it's also just, on a kind of, fundamental level of delivering something at a massive scale on time, then you've got to kind of like look into those sorts of things.
Yeah.
You don't just need more nodes necessarily. You might actually just need to get, licenses for all of these new waves of bits of kit.
Yeah.
We've gone seriously down the wormhole there, Chris.
I know, yeah, tell me about it. I'm nodding. I believe in it. I like the idea of low res stuff though, and then just being able to rehydrate it into something, much better.
Yeah, dehydrate it, take it into space, unpackage it on Mars. Yeah.
Yeah, give it to Jeff Bezos and let him float away with it to the rest of his life, please. Well, on that note, before Amazon start tracking me and bang on it, I'll let you be because I need the toilet. But
nice.
That's an hour and a half. That's been amazing. That's we could natter forever, I think.
Yeah, no, pleasure, Chris. It's been really enjoyable getting to know you and being a part of this. It's awesome what you're doing. And Michael, Victor, Max, and Where Giants Roam. One day we will know your name. Nice to see you all. Thanks for joining. I hope you got something out of it.
We'll start a hashtag with give Michael a job, I think, soon. We're on your side, Michael. We'll get him to do it. Perfect. Right, this is the abruptly end all, but I really, really appreciate it. Have a great rest of the day and week, and we'll catch up soon.
Thanks all.
Cheers, Chris. Cheers, guys.
Cheers, guys. Thank you.